Welcome to the Homeschool Together podcast. Where one working mom and a stay-at-home dad help you navigate the nuts and bolts of the growing and dynamic world of homeschooling.
With a focus on early learners, like me.
All the ins and outs of building and maintaining your homeschool life.
Homeschool.
Find out tips and tricks to make things like this easier.
I'm reading.
And ultimately, enjoy educating your kids. And what's that last thing?
Have fun together. Did I do good, Daddy?
Yeah, you did, sweetie. Good job. Hello and welcome back to Homeschool Together, and thank you for joining us. Today we have one of our favorite things to do is the Homeschool Journeys, but before we begin, if you want to be on Homeschool Journeys, why don't you go down and hit the email us at homeschooltogetherpodcast@gmail.com and let us know if you'd like to be on the show and tell your story and hear about your journey through homeschooling. We'd love to hear it. We're always reaching out for new voices, and today we have Bekkah from Raising Them Simply YouTube channel, and we talked to her about being a mom and having 3 kids and being a nurse and having a career and doing all the things and still being able to homeschool your kids. It was a really fun discussion. Bekkah's always wanted to homeschool. She tells in the podcast, always from the beginning. It's been something that she's been very interested and very passionate about, and it was really cool to hear her story and how she made that into reality and be able to balance having 3 kids and also working. She's a nurse part-time, but being able to do that with her family, I think it's just an incredible story. And I love hearing, what's going on in different households. And she's up there in Minnesota. So it was really cool to listen to that.
Yeah. It's been such a while since we've done a journey. We were sitting down to record this and we were like, oh man, it has been like a while.
It's been a while.
We've just done a lot of informationals and things, which I love, but there's something about getting back to the homeschool journeys that really helps to connect it for me. And just, homeschooling is such a personal decision about why we do it and what our philosophies are and what we're hoping to get out of it and just all the things. And so I think it's really easy to get caught up in our own little world or the world of our close friends. I love hearing these journeys to get other people's perspective and be like, oh, yeah, you're right about that part of it, or I didn't think about that, or that's not my reason, but that's really cool that's applicable. And I love hearing from people too that are juggling as many things as Bekkah is, because there's this assumption that people make that if they work or, whatever their schedules are, that it would be impossible. And I hate for certain people in different situations, it isn't really a possible option, isn't the right option for their family. But if it's something that you feel really passionate about, I feel like there's always a way to try to make something work. And we've even talked with, homeschool parents who've made career changes or backed off on work hours for a bit while their kids are younger because they really wanted to do this. Yeah. So I just think it's always cool to hear like, hey, it might be a little chaotic, but here's how we juggle it. Here's how it works for us. And here's how we still found joy in this system. So yeah, I love these homeschool journey interviews. I don't think we do enough of them, but it, like you say, it takes volunteers. So definitely let us know if you want to do that. But I loved hearing from Bekkah. We really enjoyed our conversation, and we hope you do too. Hi, Bekkah. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me.
So let's get a little baseline on you and your family. Can you tell us a little bit about you and why you all chose to homeschool?
Yeah, so we are a family of 5. I have a 6.5-year-old. Now that's very important. And then
the half is important.
The half is very important right now. And then we've got a 3-year-old and an almost 1-year-old. We live in Minnesota, and I am also a part-time nurse. So we do the whole school and working thing, and my husband is able to work around our schedule, and it works really good for us.
Wow. That's great. Was your schedule kind of a primary reason to homeschool so that when you're off, your kids can be off with you?
I've always wanted to homeschool. I remember telling my friends in junior high that this whole public school thing was not for me. And my kids were totally going to be homeschooled, and everyone thought I was crazy. When my husband and I got together, I told him that's what I wanted to do, was to homeschool any kids I had. And he was just kind of like, yeah, maybe. And that's a later conversation.
Yeah, right.
Then 2020 happened, and a lot of things in our state is very online, and everything got so complicated. And that's not something that we wanted for our kids. And my son hadn't started school in the public system at that time yet. So it just made perfect sense. And my husband's schedule, since he is very flexible and able to work around my schedule, it just worked out that way.
That's great. Did your husband have a little bit of like, yeah, we'll see. Did he have some preconceived notions about homeschooling?
Oh, for sure. A lot of people have that notion of public schoolers or homeschoolers rather are weird
Mm-hmm.
and they're not socialized.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a newer thing too in this secular realm where when you
Mhm.
think of homeschoolers, you think of everyone's lives revolving around some sort of religious denomination.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
And it hasn't been until really recently where people have realized that you don't have to be a part of that to homeschool. And he just didn't understand what that would look like for us and for our family. And so we sat down and we chatted about what was important to us and the type of educational style that we wanted for our kids. And then he realized, yeah, you know what, we really could do this and it could work out really well for us. And he said, there's no harm in trying. And if it doesn't work, we've always got the public school system. So we'll just
Mm-hmm.
try it. And he really fell in love with it in the results that he saw in our kids.
Oh, no, I love how you guys had that conversation of like what is important to you as a family and the homeschooling and what is best. Like Ariel and I have that conversation all the time
Yeah,
whenever
a
we're
lot.
trying to, make some type of pivots in the life or whatnot and said, is this new thing, fulfilling the original goal of what we want to achieve? Now you're saying you want to homeschool. Do you want to homeschool all the way through, or is your vision to go to 12th grade, or do you feel like there's a stopping point for you somewhere?
I really do see us doing it long term. Like I said, that's something that I always wanted, but we're taking it one step at a time. In our state, we're very fortunate. We're in Minnesota and we can do dual enrollment. So, as we get into high school or junior high, if we wanted our kids to do band, they could do that through the public school system. Or if we wanted them to take algebra, they could dual enroll in a local college and have it count as a high school credit as well as a college credit. And so that's the other point that we talked about when it came to homeschooling. My husband brought up, well, what about physics or things like that? And it's like, well, yeah, I might not be qualified for that, but there are other resources around us where our kids could do that. And that shouldn't be a deciding factor in, oh, we shouldn't homeschool because I don't know how to teach anatomy and physiology or pre calculus. Um, so yeah, in our area, we are very lucky that we're able to utilize those resources.
Well, so that's really good information. Maybe people at home don't know that we have questions and stuff we pre-send, but talk to a little bit about like maybe what does Minnesota homeschooling look for
Yeah.
you guys? What are the requirements? What are the things that you guys have to do or not have to do for your homeschool?
Yeah, so nothing needs to be done legally until your child turns 7. So I'll kind of talk about the brief research I've done because I don't have a 7-year-old yet. Um, but starting at 7, there is paperwork for the state that you have to fill out and mail back. And if you've already been enrolled in a school, then you would notify whatever school district as well. Since my child hasn't done anything with the public school system in our district, I don't have to notify them directly. Technically, they do still try to reach out, and you can reach back out to them to let them know out of curious or just to be nice, but it's not something that you have to do. There's other paperwork that you need to fill out. You also have to do standardized testing
Mhm.
annually. And
Mm-hmm.
there's different ways you can go about that. There are companies around us that you can go through, and at a younger age, you can just have a conversation over Skype with someone and show them a few examples of your child's work, and they ask questions. So you don't have to do like a bubble test or an online test or anything. So there's different routes that you can go through that. And then there are specific subjects you have to teach, like math, English, language arts, geography, things like that.
That's awesome. Do you have a plan to attack those subjects? How are you thinking with respect to your homeschooling? Do you go towards the standards route, or are you trying to just fill in core and go in with interest? What's your idea there?
We do kind of a mixture of both approaches.
Okay.
We really love learning through literature and the Charlotte Mason type style. So we do a lot of Build Your Library, which is one of the reasons why we even found your channel was when we found about Build Your Library. And as you know, Build Your Library does geography, history, art, science, those type of things. Now, if my son, we kind of do these little powwows when we decide we're going to look at what we're going to learn about for the next year. I'll ask him, hey, is there something for science that you really are interested in? And last year he wanted to learn about anatomy and physiology, and I was pregnant with our youngest, and I was like, perfect, I'm a nurse, I can totally do this. So we decided
experiment in the home.
Right. So we decided that we would do anatomy and physiology for science. For that, this year we're doing marine biology. That's something that he's always been interested in, so we're doing that. But we kind of do both approaches. If something is going in our homeschool and we planned it one way and it's just not jiving and not working, I'm not going to force my children to kind of do it the way that I envisioned it in my head. But we also understand, and we try to talk about how we have some reluctancies in certain areas of our school. And even if you don't necessarily want to learn something, it's still important that we do so. So we have some dyslexia and other things in our school. And I know you guys mentioned that too with your reluctant reader. And so it's kind of a learning curve for our children too, just because you don't want to learn something, it's still important.
Yeah, teaching them that grit has been a big one for us.
Yeah, it gets a little easier as they get older. I mean, you get a different level of
sass.
Yeah. There's a little bit of talk back there, but they do kind of go like, okay, I'll do what you ask.
It's sort of like the taking your cold medicines. Like, I don't want to take it. I'm 4 years old. I'm not doing it. And like the 9-year-old's like, okay, fine, Dad.
She's gonna grumble about it, but she'll do it. So
Right.
It's a little different.
Now you guys are teaching. Now your husband was a little reluctant at the beginning, talking about reluctant homeschooler. When you're at work, and we'll talk maybe a little bit more how you guys do this, but does he help out as well? And do you guys have a system where you guys are doing the homeschool together, or is it really just all on your shoulders?
So at first we thought, on the days where I would work, if we wanted to do a certain reading lesson or something, I would write down detailed notes for my husband to look at and say, this is exactly what we need to do today. And he would try to do it. But with some of the reading challenges and stuff we have in our homeschool, my husband would be better suited helping with other subjects. And so if we are going to do a science experiment, or maybe we're going to be doing prehistory here coming up, and maybe when we get to the dinosaur section, that is something that he can do with the kids, or do a model or something with him. So he does a lot of the like hands-on experiment building artsy stuff. That's more for him. And I do more of the one-on-one curriculum following sort of schooling. And that'll look different as our kids get older. My husband is very much into the art and stuff. That's how he always has been. And so if my son shows interest in that, which he's starting to show that he's going to kind of follow in dad's footsteps that way, then my husband will take over more of that stuff. But once he gets more established in reading and math and things, and is able to process things a little bit differently, then maybe my husband will take over more of that stuff.
That's been something that's been really cool with us. Like, Ariel has kind of a flex schedule. So some days she's home, some days she's not. And some days I have to go do something and she can take over. If we send the kids to the grandparents, like they were this past weekend, my mom's like, "Hey, what's the homeschool?" And I can give you the homeschool stuff and they can do that. It's really nice to have kind of this like community effort and support. I think that's amazing. Now, let's talk a little bit about your schedule. Like you're a working mom that is also homeschooling. How do you guys manage that, and maybe flow into what does your day kind of look like? How do you manage the various things that you're doing with respect to your work schedule?
Yeah, so the way that it works for my schedule is I do 12-hour shifts and I
Wow.
work 2 or 3 days a week. So that leaves, all the other days where we could do whatever we would like.
Okay.
If it is a school day, we started getting into the habit by 9 o'clock. My son has to start getting dressed and brush his teeth and all of that stuff.
Sure.
That's kind of like pulling teeth sometimes.
We know.
It's gotten us a while to the point of deschooling myself on we don't have to start school at a specific time. My son
Hmm.
doesn't work well that way, but him understanding that we also don't do school in the afternoon because that does not work for us
Hmm.
either.
Hmm.
So um by around our goal is about 10 o'clock is
Hmm.
when we start school. And we started recently preschooling my second child
Hmm.
because she's 3 and she has to do everything her brother does. So,
It's always the case.
and we finally got into a groove with my oldest. So, this is the perfect time to mix it up. So,
Hmm.
um, I usually set up my oldest with like a explode the code worksheet, something
Hmm.
independent that he can do by himself. And then I will do more one-on-one stuff with my middle child. And I do this thing where we've got a timer. My son is very motivated by a timer, and he tries to do everything before the timer goes off, and that works well for him. So
Cool.
I will give him his independent work. I'll explain it to him. I'll set a timer, and my daughter knows when the timer goes off, then it's Big Brother's turn. And so we kind of go back and forth like that with the independent subjects for my oldest. And then by the time that's done, my daughter no longer has any interest in doing school. So she'll kind of go off and do her own thing. And that's when we'll do like our all about reading, or we do math with confidence. So we'll do those subjects.
Hmm.
And then it's usually around lunchtime. So we'll do lunch. And then after that, we will do our science or our history while they're eating. And we homeschool year round. So since I work some during the week, then I don't have any pressure and my kids don't have any pressure on every time you see mom, that means that it's school. So I want them to know that I could be mom and teacher and they could be separate things. And we're
Mhm.
not just only doing school every time we see mom. Um, so we have it set up that way. And then there's, like I said, then there's no pressure that we have to complete everything by a certain time. And as long as we get the majority of our stuff done by our level up day, we call it, for the next grade in September, then we've met our goal.
I think it's
That's
really
good.
funny that you want them to not always see you as schooling, because I have the exact opposite problem. When I come home, he's like, "Hey, I didn't quite get to that book. Could you read this to them, or could you do this thing with them?" I try to sit
She
down,
feels it. Yeah.
and they're like, "No, no, no, Mom. When you're home, it's just fun time. You aren't allowed to school." And so it's like I have to be like, "Well, no. Sometimes we still have to do stuff."
I have my kids dread coming downstairs for breakfast because dad's so organized. He's got the homeschool all set out. They could see it. They're like, "Oh no, it's not as cool." Now, because you have this kind of 12-hour shifts multiple times a week, do you kind of have like a calendar that the kids kind of follow, or do you homeschool on the weekends as well? I'm starting to think about this because I am doing my teaching certification and I am going to have to be doing my student teaching next year in the classroom,
Yeah,
and
our parent partnership.
I'm starting to think, all right, if I'm going to be doing that on Tuesday, Thursdays, those might not be schooling days. I may have to spread over to the weekend, and those may be off days for them, that type of thing. So, do you do something? Is it not just the Monday through Friday schedule, or do you have something that you work around?
Right. Yeah, we do school on the weekends too.
Okay.
And it's actually funny because my kids have never really known a traditional schedule
Yes.
because,
Ours either.
Same.
yeah. So I have worked in healthcare for like 13 years now, and I'm used to always working on weekends and all this stuff. And my husband, up until a few years ago, he worked a Monday through Friday job, but he no longer does that. So my
Mhm.
kids don't understand what even a weekend is. They'll ask me like, hey, let's go to Nana and Papa's. Like, no, Nana and Papa are working today, it's a Wednesday, they're not
Right.
home. So we do school on the weekends.
Okay.
And it works out just fine for us. All of our friends do homeschooling too, and we reserve the weekends to not be with our homeschool friends or anything. We don't do anything like that, as far as with friends and stuff. So to them, it's just any other day during the week. And
Mhm.
since that's just their normal, they don't see anything differently with that.
Our
Absolutely.
kids only know it's the weekend because they're like, is it TV day?
It's a TV
Because we
day.
only let them watch cartoons in the morning on Saturdays and Sundays because otherwise they give kind of crummy homeschool if they've watched TV first. I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yep.
They're not into it.
Well,
So
and we want to sleep in a little bit, at least once.
right. So you talked a little bit about your homeschool friends. So tell us what's your community like there where you're at in Minnesota? Do you have co-ops or is it just meetups and play groups and things or
Yeah, it's actually really, it's that was actually a really hard point for our homeschool in our area because there's a lot of homeschoolers, but there's nothing really organized at all.
Mhm.
And the organized ones are for like our Catholic community. While we're okay with that type of thing, we don't want it to seep into our schooling. So
Mhm.
um I was very, very active on Facebook, on every group you could imagine, posting all these things. And it took about a year and a half, but we finally got this, what I would say, like our core group of people that we get together with once or twice a month. And we come from all different backgrounds, which is great. And
Mhm.
what we do in this group is either we'll do like for Valentine's Day, everyone got together and they decorated sugar cookies and then they just played. And
Mhm.
sometimes around the holidays, we'll read a book. Like for Halloween, we read a book about for the kids. Everyone wore their costumes and they just played all afternoon.
Mhm.
So there are co-ops and stuff around us. They're all part of different religions, and they're actually really expensive in our area
Mm.
too. So that's not something we access around here, but we do have, even though it took a lot of time, it was well worth it posting on these groups and finally finding this group of kids that all get together so well. And
Mhm.
that community is so important, having other parents to just say, hey, this is how school went today. I need to
right.
make sure
There's some
I made the
commiseration
right
that is needed.
choice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, yes. And that's been really, really helpful.
That's awesome. So so we've talked about outside, inside. Let's talk about the inside of the homeschool. What does your homeschool look like functionally within the house? Is it spread all over the place like with
I mean,
most
like
people?
ours, like guilty.
Where do you homeschool? What does it look like? Maybe walk somebody through what that setup looks like.
Yeah, so we do primarily in our dining room, but our kitchen, dining room, and living room is all kind of open
Mhm.
to each other. So we have bookshelves spilling all over our house. And
I resemble that remark.
yeah. Um, so we've got bookshelves all over the place and specific shelves dedicated to certain things so we can rotate things in and out. We use the living room for um, a lot of the games that we do for math with confidence. There's a lot
Mhm.
of like, you take a stuffed animal and you throw it to your child and you count by twos up to 100 or
Mhm.
whatever the game is. So sometimes we're in there doing that kind of thing. My son actually has a hard time understanding that he can do school other places in the house.
Okay.
He would much rather just sit at the bench at the table and do school there. My daughter, on the other hand, she wants to be all over the place and do school everywhere. So
Mhm.
maybe at some point we'll have like a dedicated like homeschool space that would be nice to be away from our living area. But I feel like for homeschoolers, or people interested in homeschooling, they feel like they need to have this one designated spot where they can shut the door and they only go in that area for actually doing school time. And that's just not realistic for, the majority of people.
We tried it too. It just didn't work.
We've tried multiple times. Yeah.
And I know some people who have that area set up and they just gravitate toward the kitchen and stuff anyway when you have other kids and there's snacks and you want to paint but you don't want to get it on the carpet, so you might as well just do the whole activity upstairs anyway. So we just do everything in the kitchen and that works well with us.
I think so many homeschoolers end up using the kitchen as their main focal point.
Yeah, we put some built-in bookshelves in our dining room right next to our kitchen because we're like, we just got to embrace it. This is what it is.
Because we had homeschool spread around like 3 or 4 areas.
2 different floors.
So we're slowly consolidating at least to store all the stuff in one area. And
he can go in there. We still don't do it in the dining room, even though it's right next to the kitchen. He still goes in there, grabs the books and takes them to the kitchen table.
I think it's almost like ease of getting into it. Like it's okay, they had their breakfast, go put your socks on and come back, and it's just like we might as well just work at the same place. What is it like having the grandfather clock of a 1-year-old watching you guys do this the whole time?
She has recently gotten really busy and started walking.
Okay.
So that's a whole
terrifying. Yes.
Yep. You
don't find yourself tripping her once in a while trying to stunt that motion. I ain't got time for this.
Thankfully she loves the baby carrier, and
awesome.
she spends the majority of the time in the baby carrier, and oftentimes she'll fall asleep that way, and that's
a
just
lifesaver, man.
I can't tell you how many times I was in the exact same thing. I had the 4.5-year-old. I was just starting homeschool, and I had the 9-month-old or 10-month-old on my chest, and just pacing and no, we're reading and then reading from the books and stuff. The baby carrier is just an awesome tool.
Well, and a lot of people go, well, how are you going to homeschool with the baby? And I'm like, homeschooling with the baby is the easy part. It's easy, man. It's when they start walking and crawling and screeching, trying to climb up on you. Yeah.
It's so funny. So the baby carrier is an important tool for you. Are there any other tools that you have in your homeschool that you can't live without?
Because we do a lot of PDF stuff, the printer and the laminator and the binder systems and all of those are must-haves for me. I know there's a lot of people that function without them. I don't know how. That stuff is necessity. But when it comes to homeschooling multiples, specifically having a family with 3 little kids, a lot of it is just reducing your expectations. Oftentimes, like, we have these sensory bins and stuff that my daughter, my middle child, plays with so that I could get some one-on-one time with my oldest. But if the baby gets into it and throws rice all over the ground, as long as I got that math lesson done, I can vacuum that up and that's fine. But it's a lot harder to try to, wrangle the 1-year-old while I'm trying to do math at the same time. So as long as she's occupied and not hurting herself or anyone else, that's fine. So a lot of it is like having easily accessible toys on low shelves and making sure in our stage of life that everything in our area is baby proofed. So that way I can do that one-on-one time with whichever student I have. That's the most important part for us right now.
Yeah, and that was I was like, let that woman cook, man. She's saying the truth, because that was the exact same experience I had. And once you have 2, and then you have that other one that's kind of curious, it becomes so much easier because you're not having to worry about them destroying the house while you're doing the homeschool. I use naps a lot. Like the nap times became the homeschool times, because when the little one was napping, I could get the one-on-one stuff in, and I did that for maybe a year or 2. That was awesome. But that's awesome that you're able to.
Are you able to like align your 1-year-old and your 3-year-olds napping, or
if they are still napping?
My 3-year-old has never been a good sleeper, and she stopped napping when she was, I think, 1.5 years old. So while we've been homeschooling, my middle child has never napped. So sometimes it would be like putting on an educational show or whatever, just so I can get that, especially when my son, he's really taken off with reading recently. But when we were really struggling, I mean, if you watch Pinkalicious for an hour so that I can get some school done, that's okay by me. When it comes to my baby, we don't do like scheduled nap times. It's kind of whenever she wants to fall asleep. And a lot of times that will, work at a good time, and I'll try to align something more like math or reading for that nap time, or maybe the big art project or something, so I don't have to worry about her eating paint or something like that. Um,
Hey, I get the
so
non-toxic paint. They can eat as much as they.
right,
No.
to a certain point, right?
Why is their poop blue?
Right. So yeah, we tried to align it as best we can, but I think especially once you add the third child in, it's kind of like all bets are off. You can never have all children on the same schedule for anything. And you know what? I think that's done a lot of good actually for my type A personality, to kind of learn that I can, school doesn't have to look like this. It can, you can do it however you want to, and nothing's going to be perfect. So either you can just go through it and get it done, and just try to, you can either go through it and get that lesson completely done, and it's not going to look perfect, or you're going to be waiting for forever for the perfect time to get that accomplished. So we just kind of do the best that we can and just go with it.
So I'm curious with the three students, and you said you're doing Build Your Library. This is something we've been thinking about, like how we're gonna cycle. Have you come up with a plan for how you're gonna cycle through Build Your Library with the different ages?
Yeah, we were actually going to kind of follow what you guys did initially, where you did around the world and ancients, and then go back to around the world. And then I started thinking about how my oldest and my middle are 3 years apart, but my middle and my youngest are only 2 years apart. So if I were to go back and do all around the world, when my middle turns 4, well, I'm just going to redo it again in a year and a half after that with my middle two. And that didn't make a lot of sense. So um, right now, I'm kind of planning on grouping my last two children together when we get to that point. And my oldest, a lot of the stuff with Build Your Library for chapter books and stuff like that, we could do audio books, or we can have some of those books be bedtime stuff. But a lot of that stuff at that point, when we get there, he'll be able to do independently. And there's that kind of like that break in Build Your Library where they do 2 years of American history.
Right, fifth and sixth grade.
Right. So I was kind of thinking by the time we got to that point, we could pause or reassess at that point and see if we can just all do US history together for those years. And then by the time we're done with that, then we can kind of take off from there, and they can all be together. When things start getting more complicated and complex, the bigger thought processes that you need to have, then we could do that all together and not feel like we're spreading ourselves too thin.
Yeah, I think that's really smart.
Yeah, I think it's different for every family, and I think you're making a great decision there. There's kind of like, okay, this is the natural split there. How I can carry that forward, and maybe over time you'll maybe figure out how to loop in the older ones sometimes with the younger ones. We've started to notice with the 9.5-year-old being able to utilize her as an older teacher or a younger teacher in certain circumstances. Like, hey, could you read this book to your sister, or can you help her with her math, that type of thing? And we're starting to do that. I'm starting to see that in the last few
Actually
weeks.
been really nice.
It's been really fun because it's like I can walk away and go do something real quick. Hey, can you help your sister? She's doing inequalities. Like it just happened this morning. It was like your 5.5-year-old's learning, the alligators. And which one's bigger? He wants to eat the bigger one, right? And it's really getting nice to be able to have kind of a helper in that respect. And I think you'll have your older one. You'll start to lean on them when they become that independent. And you'll kind of see that.
So if we want to follow your journey for your family, can you tell us about your YouTube?
Yeah, so I have a YouTube channel called Raising Them Simply, and I just share everything about our secular homeschool journeys. So I do different curriculum flip throughs and updates as far as how our homeschool is going, and different tips and tricks for people who are kind of interested in homeschooling and how they're able to start that for themselves.
That's awesome.
Well, I can tell you the interest is growing every day. The
Yeah, it's
homeschool
true.
community is growing, especially secular homeschooling. Huge. I know at our parent partnership, we get dozens of new families walking through doing the tour, and they're all interested in homeschooling and everything. And as you being a homeschooler, a working mother of three, what type of advice could you give to those new homeschoolers? Like, how can they get started? What's the number one thing that they can take away?
I think the first thing is, after you sit and talk with your partner and what that kind of looks like for your family is you need to try to figure out how to de-school yourself. And I wish I would have taken more time to do that before I started. Especially when you research homeschooling and how to start, everyone talks about deschooling your children if they've already been through some of the school system. But school doesn't have to look like sitting at desks and 1 hour we're going to dedicate to this subject and then move on, and there's no breaks, and that's not how school has to look like. And a lot of times if you're interested in homeschooling, you're trying to make it not be like the public school system. So we need to try to not do that public schooling at home. So I would really recommend people to take the summer. Summer's a great time, especially if you're getting out of the school system, to talk to your kids and figure out what their interests are, what areas, maybe they would benefit from growing more in, and getting a lot of their feedback for how they would like their school to look like. And then for you to look at yourself and figure out how you would be able to find some middle ground and maybe purchase like a unit study or something and just dabble in it over the summer where there's no stress involved, and
I love summers.
Go from there.
Yeah,
That is
perfect.
the sagely wisdom. I agree with everything
Yeah,
you said.
that's great
That's
advice.
perfect. Well, Bekkah, thank you so much for being on the show
thanks.
today. You're wonderful, great insights, and I think a true inspiration for a lot of families out there who are trying to balance the work and the homeschooling. I know there's a big fear there with being able to work and homeschool at the same time, and you guys are able to do it, and I think it's wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's not always easy, but it's always worth it at the end of the day.
Yep, it's not the easy path, but it's a good one.
Yeah. Thanks so much for joining us today and making us a part of your homeschool journey. Please engage with us on social media. Join our Homeschool Together podcast group on Facebook and find us at Homeschool Together Podcast on Instagram. We'd love to hear your feedback, questions, and recommendations. Until next time.
Happy homeschooling!